Grand Wizard's Dark and Hypnotic World by L.S. Larkey and Atlantean Astrology. Chapter 1 of 15. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Power. The sky was bruised and heavy, the weight of it pressing down as though the world itself was on the edge of something unknown. A sharp wind cut through the valley, carrying with it the scent of rain and ancient stone. The young man stood alone on a forgotten road, staring down a path that wound its way deep into the heart of the mountains. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl that seemed to rise from the belly of the earth itself. The first raindrops fell, cold and deliberate, striking the worn cobblestones beneath his boots. They were like small heralds of what was to come, each one carrying a warning or perhaps a promise. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, but also something more, something that felt electric, alive, as if the storm itself were watching, waiting. And yet behind the physical storm, there was another. A storm brewing in his own soul, one he couldn't quite name but felt pulsing deep within him as though some part of him knew this would be the turning point. In his hand, the young man held a letter, its parchment rough and damp from the encroaching rain. The ink on its surface was impossibly dark, absorbing the dim light and reflecting nothing back. It was not an ordinary letter. It felt heavier than it should, as though the words themselves carried a weight beyond mere language. The invitation had arrived without explanation, slipped under his door in the dead of night. There had been no messenger, no sound, just the soft flutter of the parchment on the floor when he awoke. "Come," the letter had read, "the time of your reckoning is near. All that you desire, all that you seek, lies before you. Follow the path and I will show you the true nature of power." There was no signature, only a strange sigil at the bottom of the letter, a symbol he had never seen before but somehow recognized deep within himself. It had haunted his thoughts ever since, like a whisper in the back of his mind, a promise that echoed in the corners of his consciousness. Now, as the rain began to fall in earnest, the young man hesitated at the threshold of the path. It was narrow and steep, disappearing into the mist that clung to the mountains like a veil. He knew somehow that once he stepped onto that path, there would be no turning back. His heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. And yet, for a fleeting moment, doubt clawed at him. He wasn't afraid of the danger ahead, but of something more profound. The fear that once he grasped the power he sought, he might lose whatever remained of himself in the process. It was a fear he pushed aside quickly, but not before it flickered across his mind like a shadow he didn't want to acknowledge. He had spent his life in the shadow of power, watching his father, a cold, tyrannical figure, wield wealth and influence like weapons. The old man had ruled their household with an iron grip, bending the wills of those around him through money and manipulation. But for all his father's riches, for all his control, there had been no love, no warmth. His power was hollow, temporary. The young man had learned that lesson early. Money could buy obedience, but not loyalty. Wealth could control men's actions, but not their minds. In the quiet moments of his youth, he had often stared into the fire, wondering why his father, who had so much, felt so empty. Those rare moments of reflection had unsettled him, leaving him with the uncomfortable truth that power, the kind his father wielded, was a lonely throne. And yet, despite knowing this, the young man's hunger for power burned even brighter. He was different. He wanted something deeper, something more lasting. He wanted the power to bend the world to his will, not through gold or force, but through the sheer force of his presence, through words, through thought. He wanted power that couldn't be stripped away, power that would cement his name in the annals of history, a legacy carved into the fabric of time itself. The rain intensified, pattering against his cloak, soaking into the earth. He pulled the hood tighter around his face, squaring his shoulders against the storm. He was not here by chance. This was destiny, something he had been moving toward all his life. The invitation was no accident, but the culmination of a path he had started on long ago, one he might never truly understand. Still, a small voice inside whispered, asking him to pause. Was this power worth the cost? The question lingered, but only briefly before the desire for greatness silenced it once more. He took his first step onto the path. The journey through the mountains was arduous, the path steep and treacherous. For days he climbed, the rain relentless, turning the narrow trail into a slick, muddy river beneath his feet. The mist swirled around him, thick and impenetrable, obscuring the way forward. The mountains rose like silent sentinels on either side, watching him, judging him. The young man pressed on, driven by something deeper than ambition, something primal. Each step felt like an ascent towards something far greater than himself. And though the storm showed no mercy, he welcomed its fury. It was as though the storm itself was a test, a trial of his resolve, and resolve he had. His father had tried to crush him, to shape him into another one of his tools, but the young man had always resisted. He had learned how to play the part of the obedient son, but beneath the surface he had been waiting for this moment. Still, as the days stretched on, exhaustion began to creep in. With each step he felt something within him pulling away from the world he had known. His past felt distant, blurred by the mist and rain, as though the further he climbed, the more he left behind any trace of the man he had once been. His thoughts wandered to the few memories of warmth he had, fragments of fleeting joy in a world dominated by power and control. But those memories, like the road behind him, were fading, and he knew that to gain what he sought, he would have to let them go. On the fourth day, the path led him to the mouth of a towering fortress, its walls carved from the very stone of the mountain. It loomed before him like something out of a dream, dark and foreboding, the rain running in rivulets down its walls. The fortress seemed to merge with the mountain as though it had always been there, hidden from the eyes of the world. It was a place of secrets, a place of power. The gates, massive and wrought from iron, were covered in the same sigil that had marked the letter. The young man's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. As if sensing his arrival, the gates groaned open, revealing a long, dark hallway that stretched deep into the fortress. He stepped inside without hesitation. The air was cooler here, still damp from the storm, but it felt charged, almost electric. The walls were lined with tapestries and ancient artifacts, their meanings long forgotten by the outside world. It was a place where the past lingered, where history and myth intertwined. He followed the hallway deeper into the fortress until it opened into a grand chamber, its ceiling so high that it disappeared into the shadows above. The room was dimly lit by torches, their flames flickering against the stone walls, casting long, shifting shadows. In the center of the room stood a figure cloaked in black, his back to the young man. The young man stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The Grand Wizard. The figure turned slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled. His face was hidden beneath a hood, his features obscured by the shadows that clung to him like a second skin. Only his eyes were visible, cold, calculating, and filled with an ancient, terrible knowledge. The young man felt an involuntary shiver run down his spine. This was the being he had sought, the one who had sent the invitation, the one who could show him the path to true power. For a long moment, the Grand Wizard said nothing, his gaze fixed on the young man, as if weighing him, measuring his worth. "You've come," the wizard said at last, his voice low and resonant. Like the rumble of distant thunder, it filled the room, commanding the air, the walls, everything within it. The young man forced himself to meet that gaze, refusing to show weakness. "I have," he replied, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. "I seek the power you promised." The Grand Wizard's lips curled into a faint smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Power," he repeated, the word lingering on his tongue. "Everyone seeks power, but few understand its cost. I'm prepared to pay whatever it takes," the young man said quickly, almost too quickly. His eagerness was evident, and the wizard's smile widened. "Is that so?" The wizard took a slow step forward, the shadows seeming to follow him as he moved. "And do you know what it is you ask for? The power I wield is not like the power your father had. Money is a child's toy, a crude instrument. True power is far more subtle, far more dangerous." The young man clenched his fists at his sides. I don't care about money. I want more than that. I want to control the minds of men. I want to shape the world with my words. The Grand Wizard stopped a few feet from the young man, his gaze piercing. And why should I give that power to you? Why should I teach you what others have died seeking? The young man hesitated. He had expected tests, trials, but not this. He had prepared himself for challenges of strength or endurance, not for this simple, direct question, but deep down he knew the answer. Because I'm willing to do whatever it takes, he said quietly. I'm not like the others. I'm not seeking power for wealth or glory. I want more than that. I want a legacy. The Grand Wizard was silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing. Then, with a suddenness that made the young man flinch, he reached out and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. You are not wrong, the wizard said softly. The power you seek will give you everything, control over minds, over nations, but it will also take everything from you. Are you ready for that? The young man's heart pounded in his chest. He had known there would be a cost, but hearing it spoken aloud was different. Still, he had made his decision long ago. I'm ready. The Grand Wizard nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the young man's face. Very well, your journey begins now, but know this, there is no turning back. Once you start down this path, you will see the world as it truly is, and you will never be the same. The young man swallowed hard, but nodded. The Grand Wizard stepped back, his hand falling away. Come, there is much to learn, and time is short. The young man followed him deeper into the chamber, the rain still pounding against the stone walls outside, but now it felt distant, as though the storm had moved on. Inside these walls, another storm was brewing, one that would change the world forever. And the young man knew as he stepped into the shadows that his life would never be the same again.